Hello, and welcome to the Power of Three, a new webinar series from the retail media experts at Threefold. I'm so excited to bring you the first episode in the series, Measurement and Data. I'm Amber Roberts, Partnership Director at Threefold. I'm excited to be your guide today as we deep dive into all things retail media data and measurement. We'll begin with a short presentation that sets the stage for the panel discussion that features some of the industry's greatest thought leaders. Let's dig in. Let's begin by defining retail media. Retail media encompasses the entire ecosystem, including in-store, off-site, and online. Contrary to misconceptions, retail media is not limited to digital platforms. Retailers' brick-and-mortar stores remain vital as they account for over 80% of all retail transactions. It's essential for retail media networks to establish a strong in-store strategy to win with retail media. Retail media, of course, also includes a growing array of other digital opportunities segmented into off-site, on-site, in-store, and online. Retail media is ever evolving, and as the technology capabilities develop, the definition of retail media will also continue to evolve. It's being described as the third wave of digital advertising. Retail media, however, is not a new concept or category of advertising. It's been on its own journey of transformation since the 1990s and maybe even before. 30 years ago, retailers began commercializing point-of-sale materials, typically cardboard in-store or advertising materials on the shelf edge. In reality, this was often perceived by the brands as a trading tax, or if they're generous, the cost of doing business with those retailers. In the early 2000s, brands started to see the value in shopper marketing or advertising at the point of purchase, particularly for CPG brands, where influencing a shopper in a store environment could lead to a change in behavior. By the 2010s, shopping behavior were starting to change fairly dramatically. While the majority of purchases were still taking place in store, and honestly, they still are today, the decision-making pathways were beginning to take place online, meaning that digital channels were having a big impact on in-store shopping behavior. Changing media capabilities meant that brands could use things like geo-targeting to use digital channels to drive customers in store to buy. As plans to deprecate the third-party cookie were announced, brands began looking for new targeting methods. Retailers have huge amounts of this first-party customer data, with the size of this data accelerated exponentially during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the value of this data growing as new ways to use it and emerge. By the late 2020s, we envision retail media solidifying itself as an end-to-end marketing solution, one that is digital first, hyper-personalized, and sustainable for brands, retailers, and shoppers. As the third wave of digital advertising, retail media is predicted to be the fastest growing media channel in 2024, overtaking TV by 2028. Given the surge in accessibility and popularity of retail media and the proliferation of retail media networks, we must consider what makes a retail media network successful. Retailers must ensure their retail media networks are, first, omnichannel, reaching shoppers across their nonlinear paths to purchase, whether that's in-store, online, and off-site. Second, precisely and consistently measured. Third, data-backed and creatively planned. And fourth, collaborative, treating brands as clients rather than customers. All of these elements have their challenges, but the industry is at an inflection point as it grapples with measurement. And that's what we're going to unpack today. To create successful omnichannel networks, RMNs must partner with multiple suppliers that specialize in specific media offerings. This approach maximizes success, but also results in complex tech stacks, making it challenging for retailers and CPGs to fully understand holistic performance due to differing measurement and reporting solutions. Metrics available from retail media networks and media suppliers is ever growing. This web of metrics is just a sample of the type of metrics CPGs need to navigate in order to quantify their performance. Choosing the right KPIs in the campaign planning stages is just as important as measurement methodology, as brands must understand the relationship between metrics in order to isolate the key success measures for a campaign. We know there's a problem, and the industry does too. Research from Nielsen IQ and Coresight shows the industry is calling for a solution. CPG's top RMN measurement concern is a lack of reporting standardization and the ability to separate in-store shelf promotions from retail media. There's a lack of collaboration between brands and retailers in the retail media space. Brands require more support in planning and activating media campaigns. Although measurement is the final stage of activation, RMNs must assist brands in planning campaigns and setting KPIs to accurately quantify success once the campaign concludes. RMNs need to function like media agencies, foster a two-way relationship, and support brands in planning and measuring their campaigns effectively to drive success. Despite difficulties in the industry today, there are solutions emerging. The IAB is building a comprehensive framework which acts as an actionable guide for retailers, brands, and agencies to offer practical steps, key strategies, and best practices to navigate the nuances of retail media measurement. In addition, we're starting to see greater partnerships between industry experts to create quality and standardized metrics. And ad tech solutions and unified tools such as Threefold's Plan Apps technology allow brands and retailers to plan, measure, and consolidate retail media efforts. It is possible to get it right. Boots, part of the Walgreens Boots Alliance and the UK's #1 drugstore, had market-leading media capabilities that were underutilized, particularly across data and insight offerings. Its retail media existed with a sales-led approach, leading to disconnected campaign activations from the lack of a joint campaign planning approach with its suppliers. There was limited alignment between the external supplier experiences and the internal Boots teams. In order to overcome these challenges, Boots partnered with Threefold in 2021 and adapted its ways of working to create a successful flywheel, implementing consistent standardized measurement at the core of its campaign planning and activation. Boots Media Group now leads campaign planning using Boots' robust first-party data. Campaigns are now measured in a standardized and consistent way to allow CPGs to understand true performance from a variety of indicators, including incremental sales lift, return on investment, impressions, and clicks. The measurement and performance transparency enables brand advertisers to demonstrate positive ROI and make business cases internally to grow their retail media investment. This efficiency allowed Boots to invest in and evolve its media estate to open new opportunities for brands and drive better performance over time. This understanding of performance can feed once again into the effective planning of connected and targeted campaigns for Boots supplier partners. And all of this data is stored centrally in Threefold's retail media operating system Plan Apps, which allows our retail partners and their suppliers to plan and evaluate retail media campaigns. At the core of Plan Apps is efficiency and optimization, using data to make retail media work harder and drive more sales. It helps Boots and its suppliers by allowing them to closely examine what has worked, and equally as important, what has not worked, to create long-lasting retail media strategies for brands. Plan Apps accelerates the understanding of a retailer's media state performance and drives operational efficiencies through the automation of core activities. For brands, it enables bespoke campaign creation with guided media choices based on robust benchmarks, with every dollar spent on media driving stronger performance and ROI. So what's the result? Boots Media Group has far exceeded expectations, increasing sales performance for brands and profits for Boots. There is a way to get it right. Looking ahead, standardized data measurement is the future of retail media. Only retailers that offer robust measurement will win. Retailers must onboard the right technology to drive efficiencies. And lastly, retailers must rethink their relationships with brands, offering a true collaborative approach to media measuring and planning. Now that we've explored the intricacies of retail media measurement and data standardization in our presentation, it's time to delve deeper into these topics with our distinguished panelists. Each of them brings a unique perspective and a wealth of experience to the table. So without further ado, let's welcome our esteemed panelists for today's discussion. First up, we have Bianca Hall, Senior Director of Insights at SMG. With her extensive background in consumer insights and data analytics, Bianca has been instrumental in deciphering consumer behavior trends and driving strategic decisions for SMG. Her expertise in retail media measurement will provide us with valuable insights into the evolving landscape of data standardization. Next, we're honored to have Jeffrey Bustos, Vice President of Measurement, Addressability Data, and Commerce at IAB. Jeffrey's leadership in developing measurement frameworks and advancing addressable advertising solutions has been pivotal in shaping the industry's approach to data-driven strategies. We look forward to hearing his perspective on the challenges and opportunities in achieving data standardization with the retail media ecosystem. And then last but certainly not least, let's join me in welcoming Jennifer Bailin, Director of E-commerce at Southern Glazer Wines and Spirits. Jennifer's hands-on experience in leveraging digital platforms and optimizing e-commerce channels has positioned Southern Glazers at the forefront of innovation in the beverage industry. Her insights into the practical implications of data standardization for retailers will be invaluable for our discussion today. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Lovely to be here too.
So let's go ahead and dive in. So in the presentation earlier, we listed some of the components of a successful retail media network were an omnichannel offering, standardized campaign management, data-driven planning, and retailer collaboration with brands. So Jennifer, when you're planning a retail media campaign, how does Southern approach setting goals and KPIs with your retail media partners?
Yeah, great question, Amber. We start off by setting goals with them, that are and really aligning on our objectives to make sure that they're measurable and achievable. We don't really want to set a goal that's not going to be achieved. So we typically begin with defining clear campaign objectives, such as increasing sales, boosting brand awareness, or driving website traffic. Then together we collaborate to establish specific KPIs that directly correlate with those objectives. They could include ROAS, CPR, conversion rates, customer acquisition costs. But it's really crucial to ensure that the goals are realistic, relevant to the campaign's purpose, and align with the capabilities of the retail media network. I would also like to add that regular communication and feedback throughout the campaign help to ensure that we stay on track and achieve those agreed upon goals.
Yeah, you bring up such great points. So, the thought around the different metrics and measurements and like the collaboration required to partner with each retailer, it's so critical. Choosing the right KPIs, I feel like sometimes is half the battle when you're setting up a campaign and, defining success. Bianca, from your experience, how should brands and retailers work together to approach measurement? Can you just copy and paste what was successful in the past, or should you be approaching each campaign a little bit more thoughtfully?
Well, Amber, I think the answer to both parts of those questions is to start with objectives. So when brands and retailers are working together, it's so important that they are fully aligned on what the objectives of the campaign are. Your objectives are going to impact everything from your campaign strategy, the channels that you use, the creatives you select, but of course, also how you measure success. So it's really important that we align measurement KPIs to the objectives that we set. However, consistency and transparency is also very important in measurement. So I would be very wary of a scenario where KPIs are cherry-picked for every single evaluation individually, and there's no consistency around the metrics that are shared. And as a result, no transparency around how these metrics are calculated. So it's very important to find the right balance between the two, making sure you do have consistency in how you're evaluating and transparency around how those metrics are calculated that is delivered through every single evaluation, but you also have an element of the evaluation that is specifically focused around the KPIs based on the objectives of the campaign.
Yeah, that you make some really great points about kind of that consistency. With every retailer now having a retail media network, you kind of think that the playing field would be stacked pretty evenly, with everyone kind of having the same tools and same measurement capabilities, and even to the same process to analyze that campaign. But I think everyone here knows that isn't really the reality. So Jeffrey, you're attuned to retail media on both the retailer and brand side. What do you hear from brands regarding the difference between retailers and how, how this impacts RMN investment choices and the ability to analyze campaigns consistently.
Yeah, no, Amber, I think you made a great point in that fact that there's a lot of retailers that now offer media networks. PWI recently published research saying that 36% of brands right now invest in 10 or more retail media networks in the US, and the number is only bound to grow next year. So what Bianca was saying is, how do you ensure, and this is where it's really difficult for retailers, it's like that balance of like, how do you ensure that there's consistency so that I can automate, so I can ensure that the metrics I'm getting and compare metrics across retailers. But at the same time, as a brand, I want to make sure that I have that unique consumer experience. I don't want to walk into every single retailer and have the same experience because, walking to a Target, walking to a Kroger, walking to a Walmart, they're all different shopping experiences and they have different shopper missions. I could walk into the same one, but I might have a different shopper mission for each of them. So it's really, how do you balance consistency and personalization?
I love the idea of you could have a single brand advertising across retailers, but the mission is going to be different for each of those customers. So Jennifer, having worked heavily not only in e-commerce but also in store, you've had a lot of experience, kind of defining success for your marketing and media campaigns. So what measurement metrics do you use to evaluate your campaign success, both digitally and in store?
Yeah, so from a digital perspective, we look at sales attribution, click-through rates, conversion rates, ROAS. Obviously, for a test and learn, you're typically okay with anything above a 1x because you're not losing money. But obviously, in an ideal world, we want it to be about a 2x. We look at customer acquisition costs, or also I would say it's really important to the customer lifetime value. We want to see how long will generate their loyalty to the brand over their lifetime. From an in-store perspective, foot traffic is something that we're continually monitoring, right? The decline in foot traffic, the move to digital, right? So what does that penetration look like? Also sales lift. And I would also say coupon redemption rates are really important when you think about this climate that we're in from an economic perspective. Coupons are really strong, a really strong tactic to use with the consumer base, right? To keep them coming back. We also look at brand lifts, average transaction value, but if I could highlight anything, I would say it's coupon redemption rates.
Interesting. So in an ideal world, what metrics would you receive to determine if a campaign was successful or not? So this is very theoretical. I feel like we're
very theoretical.
What would you prefer?
Yeah. So yeah, we would love to see the sales attribution if it was directly linked to the campaign. We review customer engagement metrics like conversion rates, like I mentioned before, ROAS, customer acquisition costs, and again, that lifetime value, as well as the brand lift measurement to gauge overall brand awareness and the perception shifts to see if they were positive. Lastly, I would say tracking metrics related to the audience demographics, their behavior, retention rates would provide a comprehensive understanding of the campaign effectiveness.
Yeah, it sounds like there's lots of variation between what metrics are available and what aren't. I would imagine that having consistency or just generically putting together reporting across retailers is always a fun exercise.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So in the presentation, we talked about omnichannel retail media networks producing the most, successful results, since it allows brands to not only talk to customers across the entire shopper journey, but provide additional touch points to talk to that customer. Having true omnichannel insights, though, at an RMN is not nearly as common as kind of we're talking about here. So Bianca, how do you approach measurement for an omnichannel campaign across in-store, online, and offsite?
Great question. And I would say that, being very honest, this is something that the industry is not fully mastered yet. So in the US in particular, often omnichannel measurement is referred to, but actually what is happening in reality is this is measurement of maybe a portion of that shopper journey, like online and offsite. So traditionally, we have very effective ways of measuring the impact of channels in isolation, but understanding how they perform across the shopper journey is much more challenging. However, it is possible to do with first-party data. So we can compare an exposed audience with a control audience to give us an understanding of how these channels worked together to form an uplift across the whole shopper journey. So there's definitely capabilities that exist within the retail media landscape, but there's still some hurdles for us to overcome to make sure that we are consistently able to measure in that way.
Yeah, from your experience, how do you know that a retail media campaign's been successful? Like what are the most important factors to be considering?
As always, I do think that it ties back to the objective of the campaign, as I was saying earlier, and looking at those objectives and making sure that you are measuring them according to the right KPIs. In terms of those KPIs, though, I would say that traditionally, the measurement KPIs have always been quite focused on these short-term objectives. But more and more, we're seeing that retail media campaigns have the potential to do so much more. And with first-party data, we do have the capability to measure some of the longer-term metrics that Jennifer was talking about earlier, such as customer lifetime value. So there's really a lot of potential in retail media to understand so much more than we ever have before.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, Jeffrey, we've been talking about standardization a lot and consistent metrics, and there's been a really big push to standardize retail media measurement. Why do you feel like there's a need to make this happen, and what barriers are you encountering and kind of leading this charge at the IAB?
The main push was just the significant growth in investment of retail media. I think that today, retailers' technologies, some of them are pretty advanced, but if you look at 2020, 2021, retailers were demanding large media budgets, but they were offering startup level metrics. And everyone says that it took Facebook 11 years, to Google 14 years, but the thing is that once they hit that same level of investment that took retail media's, Google's platform 14 years in was really awesome. Like the metrics, the consistency, the transparency, you knew what you were getting. And the biggest kind of hurdle barrier to measurement and consistency is not just the definitions, but also the methodology. So one of the big, I would say, tension points when we're developing these measurement standards was viewability, in that we wanted to make sure that there was consistent viewability in how ads were being transacted and the currency in which they were being transacted. So that means that you can see this owl. So Amber, if after this you decide to buy an owl, I can claim that attribution to it. But if the owl was on my chair, you can't see it. I can say, well, it was right there with me, but no one saw it. So I can't really claim attribution to that sale. So what we really wanted to do is we wanted to make sure that there was consistency in the methodology and there was consistency in definition. However, it gets a little more complicated because there's also inconsistencies in data sources. So the idea that Boots and Carrefour and Walmart should have the same data and incrementality and econometric methodology doesn't make sense, because they have different data cadence, they have different shopping behavior, they have different types of first-party data they're bringing in. So the question was, how do we ensure there's consistency while still allowing retailers to innovate and understand their data infrastructure? So it was a difficult balance, and that's why we really focus on non-derived metrics and providing guidance on, if you do it this way, this is how you should do it, or you can do it this way, or you can do it this way. And then if you don't do it any of these three ways, you need to have transparency, which was the biggest push we wanted to have. It's just transparency. So as a buyer, I know what I'm getting.
You bring up some fantastic points kind of about the data and how it differs from retailer to retailer and what those measurements actually mean. And it also sounds like there's a couple of retailers that are leading the charge in terms of this is what best in class looks like. So how do you see retailer data as a whole evolving as the retail media landscape evolves?
I think we're going to see much more data collaboration, such as what we're seeing with Walmart and Roblox, or Kroger and Disney, Carrefour and Netflix. I think this data collaboration is essential because you're only driving so many people to your website or your store, and if retailers want growth of consumers going to the stores and brands really want to reach new consumers, it's really that data collaboration with with an offsite, and then also how do you then bring all of that in store? Because still in most countries, 70 to 80% of sales are happening in store. So how do you but 60% of the sales are impacted by online. So it's like, how do you have that full omni-channel online, offline attribution? And I think that's going to be a big part next year in how retailers try to resolve that.
For sure. I love the idea of being able to measure in store the way that you measure it online, just having that consistency. Like, that's the dream.
It is. After that, I'll retire, but we'll see.
I think we can all retire after that.
So, kind of going on this, this data journey, Jen, how does data from previous campaigns factor into the planning process for future retail media campaigns at Southern?
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to bring up the buzzword omnichannel, right? It really affects how we considered future campaigns. And I would also like to say that digital influence, because that's something that's a little bit harder to measure, right? So, previous campaigns obviously play a really crucial role in shaping the planning process. But we have to, with what we have available, we have to measure the campaign performance, what worked well, what didn't, refine strategies, maybe set more realistic goals for upcoming campaigns. I'm trying to understand that audience behavior. If it truly is omnichannel, that's where it gets more difficult in that digital influence. But optimizing targeting, messaging, there's so many touch points that even us, you're on your phone, you're on your desktop, you're in a store. So making sure that the creative elements really maximize that effectiveness is very important. And, moreover, I really say historical data, it enables us to track trends over time and then help to identify seasonality patterns that assess the long-term impact of the campaigns on key metrics, right? Sales, customer acquisition, brand awareness. It really helps future planning to optimize these resources and overall campaign performance over time.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. So we're talking a bit to Jeffrey about, the IAB's efforts to standardize measurement among, various retail media networks. How would standardization benefit your retail media strategy?
I kept hearing the buzzword transparency, right? I would say that's key, right? Standardization fosters greater transparency in reporting, ensuring that all parties involved have a clear understanding of how campaign performance is being measured and evaluated. So it reduces the ambiguity and really enhances trust between the partners, right? Like, so marketers and advertisers and retail media networks. Efficiency is also a big one. We look at standardized measurement. Marketers, in this line of work, we streamline the analysis process, spend less time reconciling disparate data sets, comparability, that's another thing we look at, right? Just metrics that allow for easier comparison of campaign performance across the RMNs helps us to identify more effective platforms and allocate resources accordingly.
Amen. Transparency. I feel like that's like just the key. It's so critical. Yeah. Bianca, I'm going to toss this question to you. How do you convince retailers they need to be transparent? Do you think that there's a thing as like too much transparency? Because I know that that's something retailers like to keep like pretty close to their chest. They're not as transparent as brands would like to see them be. But I think the fear is that they're just going to be providing way too much information, and it's just going to become confusing. So how do you strike that balance?
Yeah, interesting. I think I have seen time and time again examples of where in the UK transparency actually unlocks growth. So, for example, we've used measurement data to work with UK retailers on rate card reviews. And the reality is that sometimes certain channels are not working and their rate cards need to be reviewed and potentially their price points need to be lower. Sometimes channels need to be struck off the retailer toolkits. But the inverse of that is also possible. You can use measurement to actually show that there's certain channels that have much higher demand that actually could be offered at a higher price point. So actually drive that transparency doesn't specifically mean you're going to lose investment because you're going to be showing a specific story that's going to mean that you're going to have to change your price point in a negative way. There's loads of opportunities that actually can use this more transparency to drive better brand investment, because as Jennifer says, that actually sort of enables more trust in that partnership and that collaboration between the retailer and the brand. However, I would say that for me, there is absolutely no such thing as too much transparency, but there is such a thing as too much data. So one of the things that we're really passionate about at SMG is making sure that all of the data that we're sharing is actionable. We want to make sure that we're not overloading brands with so much data that they can't actually use and don't know what to do with, but rather focusing specifically on data elements that can drive that actionable insight for future campaigns.
Completely agree. There's a difference between data overload and the data that you can actually action upon. So in this journey to standardization and data transparency from retailers, what barriers are you seeing in the effort to kind of like standardize retail media measurement?
I think there are definitely some challenges, and there's maybe a perception that a lot of retailers are sitting on this data and choosing not to share it. But in many cases, it is actually retailer tech stacks that are preventing this data from being shared. Retailer tech stacks were often not specifically created with retail media in mind. But as retail media grows, it is more and more important for those tech stacks to have the right capabilities to ensure that we can measure in the right way to truly understand performance. So we are seeing an improvement there, but we also know it won't happen overnight.
Agreed. So Jeffrey, piggybacking off of the question I asked Bianca, pushing for standards and creating those standards is just one major part of the task. But an even bigger challenge is it still lies ahead. It's the implementation. So how do you see retailers bringing this to life? Like, is there a way for them to realize standardization within their businesses?
I think yes, but I think Bianca brought a really good point in terms of tech stack and the time that it takes to make those changes. So retailers are really old organization for the most part. So you're pretty much they need to modernize a lot of their infrastructure. We're seeing a lot of retailers right now move towards standardization. Amazon has 2. So what we did with the retail media measurement standards is we had 6 chapters. And they outline standards, and they also outline business requirements, because it felt kind of weird to be like, this is how you should do incrementality, and this is the standard, and you don't have an option. It was more of like, hey, if you're going to do incrementality, these are the best practices that you should do. And then that kind of had a point of communication between a brand and a retailer to understand how a retailer was doing it. But with the standard, each chapter is a standard that the MRC offers, and we adapted that to retail media. So we've seen that Amazon and Instacart have gotten 2 of the 6 standards that we outlined. So we are starting to see retailers move towards standardization. And I think a lot of what the retailers are trying to do also is to try and see, right, understand and prioritize which of the standards they're moving towards to. I think the most important standard when we think about it is how outcomes are being measured. So we define closed loop measurement as the ability to measure the impact of an ad to an outcome. And you needed to make sure that someone saw that ad, which was probably the most controversial part, but kind of makes sense because you can't just claim credit for something. And then we also talked about the weighting of it. So if you are trying to say that something's incremental, sure, but if you're not running a true A/B test and there's a lot of synthetic controls being used due to machine learning and AI, you don't really need to do econometrics tests as often. There needs to be a weighting system. So like if I search for Frosted Flakes, and Amber, you search for cereal, and we both buy Frosted Flakes, and we both see a Frosted Flakes ad, you have a higher incremental value than me. I have an incremental value share because of conquesting and competitive, conquesting. But I think that having that understanding with brands and ensuring that retailers have that level of transparency, that they are weighting things accordingly, was one of the things we wanted to make sure in the measurement standards. And a lot of retailers are moving towards this implementation and this consistency of measurement.
Okay, so I've got the $1 million question for you. Where do you think this conversation is going to be several years from now?
I think several years from now, I mean, we're seeing the rise of media networks across, General Motors, Intuit, airlines, all launching retail media networks, or I would say data collaboration marketplaces. I think the conversation in 5 years is not going to be around incrementality. It's going to be on customer lifetime value, because that's really the end game. I think right now it's really difficult to measure that, so no one's measuring it. But if I'm Coca-Cola, I don't just want you to buy Coke. I also want you to buy Topo Chico. I also wanted to buy Epifisca. I want you to buy all my products. So I think that relationship with a retailer and a brand would be like, how do I ensure that everyone's buying the full basket size? I don't just want you to buy, Crest toothpaste. I want you to buy the floss and the toothbrush and the mouthwash, and it's everything within that package, and the deodorant and just everything around that. So I think that's where the conversation is going to go once we have those data signals, is how can retailers and brands collaborate to improve the customer lifetime value? And then at that point, the ability doesn't really matter if you can actually prove that you're increasing that for a brand.
That's very interesting. I think from a in-store perspective, we tend to think of customer lifetime value, but that has yet to translate kind of in an online or offline scenario. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so we're going to go through, this is a spontaneous lightning round. In one word, I want you to describe your hopes for retail media in the coming year. So let's start with Jen.
Caught me off guard on that one. I would continue to say, from an omni-channel and digital influence perspective, how do we really hone in on that, and figure out what that consumer means to a brand, right? Or their customer lifetime value, right? I think if we can capture that omni-channel consumer, if you're thinking about a store setting and online setting, they're a really valuable and loyal customer. And my last word is just transparency. I would like to hone in on that, right? Just transparency across all parties.
Awesome. Bianca, what about you?
Well, I mean, Jennifer cheated because that was not one word, so I'm going to cheat too. And I'm going to say beyond short-term ROI. Like I mentioned earlier, I think we've actually done some really good work in terms of understanding the short-term tactical implications of retail media. But to Jeffrey's point, it's just there's so much we can learn around that longer-term effect. And I think that's where the future lies.
Jeffrey, I'm going to have you round this out.
I would say alignment, and that's because of 3 reasons. One, as Bianca said earlier, alignment with the brand and what your objective is, and then also alignment internally, because brands aren't talking amongst themselves, so they're running all these campaigns. And as Jen said in the beginning, like, they are running omni-channel, but if your social team is not talking to your shopper team, is not talking to your brand team, you're not running an omni-channel campaign. You're just doing randomness into the universe. And then the last one be alignment from the retailer perspective, ensuring that they're bringing in their trade team, their merchant teams into the retail media conversation, because in-store is a huge part of retail media. And I think that having that merchant input is really important.
Mm-hmm. So true. So we are at the end of our webinar, and I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed panelists, Jennifer, Bianca, and Jeffrey, for sharing their invaluable insights and expertise with us today. So your perspectives have shed light on, kind of just the complexities of retail media, measurement and data and standardization, and, really provided us those actionable strategies for navigating the changing landscape. So whether we are setting meaningful goals and KPIs to harness the power of omnichannel insights, or, ensuring that we've got successful retail media campaigns with a collaborative approach. Your insights have been fantastic to hear within this webinar today. So as we conclude today's session, I encourage our audience to continue exploring innovative ways to leverage data and measurement in your retail media efforts. By staying curious, adaptable, and collaborative, we can drive meaningful change and unlock new opportunities. So thank you again to our panelists and their incredible insights, and thank you to our audience for joining us today. If you have any further questions or would like to continue the conversation, please feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or on our website. Remember to stay tuned for future webinars and events from Threefold, where we'll continue to explore the power of 3, supercharging your retail media. Thanks, everyone.